trying to think, trying to imagine how I would feel if I was Chinese. I got a perfect score on the SAT or the ACT or whatever the standardized test is that gets you admission into the best colleges in the world. I got the best grades in my school. I'm probably going to graduate valedictorian. I'm applying for Harvard. And I feel like I did everything right. And I get a rejection letter. I'm Chinese. Or I'm white. Or I'm Indian. Or I'm Hispanic. Or I'm African American. I'm Cambodian. I'm Russian. I'm Brazilian. It could be anything. And I do all the right things. And I did not get accepted into Harvard. Where is the line drawn for some of these people? Affirmative action, in my view, was created for one purpose. Was to ensure that people growing up, living in parts of America that have been underserved, if not ignored, for decades to centuries, is to serve them, to make sure that they have an equal footing, to provide equity and a level of equality in an unfair process, in an unfair system. However, at Harvard, well, it's kind of becoming a nuisance there too. Just as it has become a nuisance to people at the University of Texas and at many other universities where there are Chinese or people of Asian American descent and Caucasians who feel that there are universities out there where the affirmative action processes or the affirmative action rules and regulations are being used too much to allow African Americans or Hispanics maybe even an unfair advantage into the prestigious school that I should have gotten into. And that's what it really seems like. I was reading this article from the failing Washington Post, as Harvard's admissions policy goes on trial, alleged victims of racial bias remain anonymous. And that says a lot to me, the fact that they're remaining anonymous. It's probably smart that they are remaining anonymous, especially after the University of Texas woman Abigail Fisher basically went to the Supreme Court against the University of Texas, arguing that their affirmative action laws hurt her chances of getting into the university, and the Supreme Court voted her down. It was the ruling in which Justice at the time, Anthony Kennedy, was the deciding vote. Well, Kennedy's out, and now we have Justice Brett Kavanaugh, and I think we all know what's going to happen. These people that are suing Harvard are probably going to win now. But beyond that, my question really is, where is the line for people that want to attack affirmative action laws? It's as if they either don't respect the history of those who now live in underserved areas, or they willingly choose to ignore it and believe that they have a right to, whatever Harvard has to offer or whatever school they so choose to go to. This article is pretty interesting, so I'll read a little bit of it. A group called Asian American Coalition for Education and Others rallied Sunday afternoon in Boston in support of this lawsuit. Critics call Blum's agenda, and I'll get to Blum in a little bit. Basically, Edward Blum, he is the president of Students for Fair Admissions. He's 66 years old. But yeah, basically, critics question Blum's agenda. Is he concerned about discrimination against Asian Americans? Again, Blum is white, and he's basically gotten a group of Asian Americans to say that Harvard's admission processes are unfair towards Asian Americans because while Asian Americans dominate when it comes to academics, it still seems that not enough of them, or not all of them, that apply to Harvard get in. And then they feel that there are African Americans who aren't nearly as smart as them are getting into Harvard. And to many universities, the argument is that we want to make sure that we have a diverse group of students that are admitted to our college. So while there might be an Asian American who scored and did better than an African American, they are still going to look or weight more of their admissions, whatever, towards an African American. And it's interesting because starting tomorrow, this is apparently going to trial, and we're actually going to get our first glimpse into how Harvard, whose admissions processes, I guess, are like highly secretive, we're going to get our first glimpse into exactly how they do their admissions. But again, it's just really interesting to me as this article goes on. Blum has acknowledged that he sought out Asian Americans whose stories would provide examples for the case, much as he looked for white students to launch cases elsewhere. He said that approach was no different from how other legal interest groups recruit plaintiffs to combat discrimination. Courts sometimes shield identities of alleged victims in civil suits. Before the trial, Harvard challenged the standing of Blum's group to sue, but the U.S. District Court, Allison Burroughs, ruled that the case should proceed. The trial, which could last 3 weeks or more, is the latest round in the long-running debate over affirmative action. However Burroughs rules, both sides expect the verdict to be appealed. And so anyway, it goes on to say Students for Fair Admissions filed its lawsuit against Harvard in 2014. And again, this was alleging that the university limits the number of Asian Americans admitted to its undergraduate college in an effort to boost applicants from other racial and ethnic groups. So this is just not just African Americans. The group also alleged that Harvard has not given adequate consideration to how it might create a diverse student body without resorting to affirmative action. Harvard denies the allegations. The university says it follows Supreme Court guidance, with race as one of many factors in a holistic review of applications, alongside grades, rigor of classes, test scores, extracurricular activities, family background, and other information. And then Harvard's president, Lawrence Bacow, wrote on Wednesday, "Let me be unequivocal," which is the equivalent to Barack Obama's "let me be clear. The admissions process does not discriminate against anybody. I am confident the evidence presented at trial will establish the facts." And you can't say an admissions process doesn't discriminate. I mean, I'm sure they're not looking at these students and looking at their pictures. Again, I'm not really sure. Someone can tell me, do you have to submit a picture along with your application? But basically, to me, it seems like they take a lot of stuff into account. And you have to discriminate. If you're looking at rigor of classes and test scores and extracurricular activities, you're discriminating at that point. Family background, I mean, you're discriminating. Of course, you probably take, again, they said they take a holistic approach, but I'm sure there is some, choosing here and there. Okay, this person with this extracurricular background would be a good fit in our community. Colleges are really, really select about the community that they build. And even then, they still get it wrong. The basis of Harvard and many colleges is, to me, let's make as much money as we can. Let's get people who are going to be good alumni, and they're going to come back and give more money to us so that we can then continue to build, blase, blase, blase. They're a system all to themselves. And so it's just, in my mind, Harvard is going to do what they feel is best for them. And then they're going to do what they feel is best for students. And that is provide them a good education, provide good faculty, staff, all those things, provide a good environment. And part of that good environment is having a diverse body of students. Look, if I go up to a university and I see it's complete, just monotonous and it's all white and things like that, I'm not going to want to go there. But if I see that there is a cornucopia, a rainbow of different races and ethnicities, and I can actually learn from other people that are from different places and things like that, I'm going to feel like I'm more at home. I'm going to feel like it's a more welcoming environment. And that's what we really need to be pushing in this world as a whole. And that's not even me talking about affirmative action. I still wholly believe that we need affirmative action. And I know that because I can easily go into inner city Detroit right down the road and see how bad we need affirmative action. Because when I go to those schools, I see 99% black people and no Asian Americans. When I grew up in Philadelphia, going through elementary school and middle school, it was 99% African Americans. It wasn't until I got to the best high school in Philadelphia, Central High School, shout outs, that I actually saw more Asian Americans and more Caucasians. As a matter of fact, I probably met the first group of Asian Americans in high school. And again, this was a highly selective high school, and even they were selective about who entered their schools. So, if you're telling me that we don't need affirmative action when it is, and this is just based on my own anecdotal evidence growing up, and I'm pretty sure it has not changed, but if you believe that we should discount people that grow up in these inner cities and have lack or no access to quality education, yet they are still doing their best, and they are still fighting, and you have students that are still working and striving to get a really good education and have a really good job and have a really good way of life. If you truly believe that they should not have affirmative action to support them to get into some of these really good schools so that they can further their education in life, then there is obviously something wrong with you. Because you, one, need to take a history lesson and see exactly how many African Americans got to this point. Let's take me, for example. I lived in inner city Philadelphia. I grew up in a single parent household. My grandparents were basically living with their parents who were servants to other people growing up. And we don't need to go, like, you don't have to go too many generations back. My great grandmother was a servant to another family. You don't have to go too far back to see that we still need affirmative action. When you see so many of these people who live in, take Chicago or Detroit, who were all part of the Great Migration generation. Their families were uprooted or uprooted their lives, moving from the South to get out of the racially segregated, destroyed South and moving north to find work. And they were all huddled into these little communities, and then they all worked in these factories for piss poor pay. And it's not just black people. I'm not just saying this was black people. You have white people out there as well. You have people of all different shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, whatever you want to say. The fact of the matter is, slavery existed in this country for a really long time. And then after slavery existed, you had decades upon decades of segregation, Jim Crow segregation, in which people of color were unfairly pushed out of the system, not even a part of the system, but just separated from the system, separate but equal. It took until what, the 1960s, Brown versus the Board of Education, before a black person was even able to go to the same school as a white person. And then a lot of people think that there was no segregation in the North. No, they used neighborhoods to segregate us in the North. Because at the same time, it wasn't even until the 60s where my mom was actually bused to another school so that they could start desegregating schools in Philadelphia. And that was the 60s. And believe me, things don't change a lot in 40 years. Mindsets don't change a lot. You have the same people that were yelling and spitting at some of those first kids that were going to school in Topeka, Kansas. They're in their 70s now, believe it or not, or their 80s, if not dead. And they had children, and their children now have children. It just doesn't go that far. So you can't tell me that affirmative action is not necessary. Oh, it's necessary. And I'm glad that there are universities who stand behind that in their admissions process, even though they might not say that, even though it might not be that blatant. I am still glad that they use it. Oh, hey, that's Matt Damon. I'm still glad that they use it in their admissions processes. And we can argue about it all you want. And I'm sure that now that Justice Brett Kavanaugh, who Matt Damon did a great job of portraying, speaking of which, on Saturday Night Live, I'm sure that now that wonderful Brett Kavanaugh is on the Supreme Court, everything about affirmative action will probably be undone. They probably will, as Kanye West, they'll probably revoke the 13th Amendment and put us all back in chains and send us back down south. If not, just ship us back to Africa. Who knows? I don't know. I'm not going to go that far. But I'm just really interested to see what's going to happen in this case for good old Harvard. And I'm interested to see, just how it's going to play out. So I'm sure I'll be following this. I might do another video about this in the coming weeks. I don't know why this whole Harvard thing has turned into a video about Matt Damon and Good Will Hunting. But we'll leave it at that, and I will see you all tomorrow. Peace out, and bye, Matt Damon. We don't need you. Bye, y'all.